Let us begin not by asking God for anything, not by seeking to understand anything, and not by attempting to change anything. Let us begin by being still. The Master did not say, understand and know that I am God. He did not say, explain and know that I am God. He said, be still and know that I am God. And so we start there not with effort, not with striving, but with stillness. You may have come here with a problem. You may have come with fear, with uncertainty, with something pressing upon your thought that seems urgent, personal, and demanding of attention. For the moment, let us make no attempt to remove it, solve it, or even name it. Let it be, not because it has power, but because it has none. We are not here to wrestle with appearances. We are here to recognize what is. There is a very deep reason why we begin this way. The human mind has been trained from generation to generation to believe that something must be done, some thought taken, some word spoken, some prayer offered to bring God into the picture. But God is not absent. God is not delayed. God is not waiting for our understanding. God is, I am that I am. That is not a promise. It is a statement of eternal fact. Now, when we come together in this way, we are not forming a human gathering. We are not entering into a discussion. We are not even entering into a lesson in the ordinary sense. We are consenting quietly, inwardly to stand on holy ground, and holy ground is not a place you go. Holy ground is a state of consciousness in which personal sense yields to the awareness of presence. The prophet did not find God in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire. He found God in the still, small voice. And that voice is not a sound. It does not shout. It does not argue. It does not repeat itself to convince you. It simply is. And when we are still enough, we discover that this presence has always been speaking not to the ears, not even to the intellect, but to the depth of the soul. So let us acknowledge something right here at the beginning. Whatever fear you believe you are facing, whatever condition seems to confront you, whatever story the mind is telling, none of it has brought you here by accident, and none of it has authority over what is about to take place. For where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Not future liberty, not promised liberty, liberty now. We are not beginning a process. We are not starting a journey toward God. We are not climbing a ladder of consciousness. We are simply consenting to stop resisting what already is. The kingdom of God is within you, not coming, not approaching, within you. And if that is true, and it is, then there is no distance to be traveled, no attainment to be reached, no condition that must first be improved. Now, you will notice something as you sit here. The mind will want to move. It will want to comment. It will want to agree or disagree. It will want to say, yes, but what about my situation? And that is perfectly natural. The mind has been trained to survive by reaction. But tonight, or in this moment, we are not asking the mind to do anything heroic. We are simply asking it to rest. Jesus said, take no thought for your life. That was not a moral command. It was a revelation of law. Thought cannot add 1 cubit to your stature. Thought cannot contact God. Thought can prepare the way, yes, but the contact itself comes only when thought is quiet enough to step aside. And so we are not pushing thought away. We are letting it pass as clouds pass across the sky, without chasing them, without naming them, without giving them meaning. As we do this, something very subtle begins to happen. The sense of personal responsibility starts to loosen. The idea that this is my fear, my problem, my burden begins to soften. And that is important, because the truth we are approaching tonight cannot be seen from the standpoint of personal struggle. It can only be recognized from the standpoint of impersonal grace. The psalmist said, "Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee." But notice he did not say how the Lord would sustain thee. He did not say when. He did not say through what means. He simply stated a fact. And the casting is not an act of will. It is an act of release. It is the quiet surrender of the belief that we are the ones holding life together. So, for these moments, let us lay down the tools of fixing and improving. Let us lay down the habit of self-examination and self-correction. Let us lay down even the desire to be spiritually successful. Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. And a child does not strive to be held. A child simply rests. In this resting, we are establishing the ground upon which everything else will unfold. Not a mental ground, not a doctrinal ground, but a spiritual atmosphere in which truth reveals itself. And truth does not arrive with noise. It arrives as recognition, a gentle, unmistakable knowing that says, without words, "It is I, be not afraid." And so we stand here not as seekers, not as patients, not as sinners trying to become righteous, but as witnesses. Witnesses to the fact that God is already present, already governing, already fulfilling itself, and in this presence, fear has no history, no future, and no law to sustain it. Let us rest here for a moment, not waiting, not expecting, simply being still. Now, having established this atmosphere of stillness, we are able to approach a subject that is often misunderstood, and because it is misunderstood, becomes frightening to the human mind. The term universal hypnotism is not meant to suggest something mysterious, occult, or deliberately imposed upon mankind. It is simply a descriptive phrase, a way of pointing to the collective acceptance of appearances as power. From the beginning of human history, men and women have lived under the belief that what they see, feel, hear, or experience through the senses constitutes reality. And because this belief has been shared, taught, reinforced, and passed down from generation to generation, it has taken on the appearance of law. But a belief, no matter how old or widespread, does not become truth by repetition. Let God be true, but every man a liar. Universal hypnotism is the agreement, unconscious, unexamined, and unquestioned, that there are powers apart from God, powers of disease, powers of lack, powers of fear, powers of accident, powers of heredity, powers of time. And once this agreement is accepted, the individual need do nothing further. The belief operates automatically, impersonally, without intention and without malice. It is important to see this clearly, because until we do, we will continue to think that fear is something we personally generate, personally sustain, or personally must overcome. But fear does not originate in the individual. Fear is not born in your consciousness. Fear is a suggestion floating in the general mental atmosphere of the world, and it attaches itself wherever it finds acceptance. The Apostle Paul spoke of this when he said, "Be not conformed to this world." He was not speaking of worldly behavior. He was speaking of worldly consciousness, the tendency to think as the world thinks, to accept what the world accepts, to fear what the world fears. And he added, "But be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind," not by fighting the world, not by reforming the world, but by withdrawing consent from its assumptions. Let us be very clear here. Universal hypnotism is not a power. It does not act, it does not create, it does not destroy. It has no intelligence, no law, no presence. It is sustained only by belief, and belief is not substance. Belief is not law. Belief is not cause. There may once have been a universal belief that the earth was flat, but that belief never made the earth flat. It merely limited human experience until the belief was dropped. In the same way, there are universal beliefs about the body, about aging, about danger, about insecurity, about sin and punishment. These beliefs do not operate because they are true. They operate because they are accepted. And the moment acceptance is withdrawn, they lose even the appearance of authority. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Not truth repeated, not truth affirmed, but truth recognized. Now, this is where the infinite way departs from many other spiritual systems. We are not taught to trace a problem back to a personal cause. We are not taught to search for a wrong thought, a hidden fear, or a secret sin. That entire approach assumes that the individual is the originator of the discord. But Joel discovered and demonstrated that this is not so. Humanity suffers not from personal wrongdoing, but from impersonal belief. When a person catches a cold, the world says it is because of weather, germs, or exposure. When another person becomes anxious about supply, the world says it is because of economic conditions. When another fears the future, the world calls it realism. But in every case, what is actually operating is not a law of God, but a law of belief. And belief, however convincing, has no creative capacity. The Master never treated disease as personal sin, nor fear as moral failure. He treated neither. He simply recognized the presence of God where error seemed to be. He said, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." And righteous judgment is not condemnation or correction. It is spiritual discernment, the ability to see through appearances to the reality beneath. This is why Joel insisted again and again that the practitioner must never enter a case humanly. The moment we believe that a condition belongs to a person, we have stepped into the hypnotism ourselves. The moment we say, "This is your fear, your disease, your problem," we have accepted the suggestion that something has gone wrong in God's universe. But God's universe does not malfunction. God's creation does not fall apart. God's law does not reverse itself. I am the Lord, I change not. And if God does not change, then harmony is not something to be achieved. It is something to be recognized. Universal hypnotism, then, is simply the claim that something other than God is present and active. And the way we meet that claim is not by opposing it, but by seeing through it. When light appears, darkness does not have to be removed. It simply is not there anymore. In the same way, when God is recognized as the only presence, fear has nowhere to stand. Now notice something very important. We are not being asked to deny what we see. We are not being asked to pretend that fear is not felt. We are not being asked to suppress emotion or sensation. We are being asked to understand that what is felt is not authoritative. It is not law. It is not personal. It is not final. And this understanding does something remarkable. It removes the burden from the individual. Suddenly, you are no longer a person trying to conquer fear. You are consciousness awakening from a suggestion. And awakening is effortless. You do not struggle to wake up from a dream. You simply awaken. So let us hold this gently. Fear is not your enemy. Fear is not a failure. Fear is not evidence that you lack faith. Fear is evidence that a belief has been accepted. And what is accepted can be released not through effort, but through recognition. We are laying the foundation now. Nothing is being demanded of you. Nothing is being required of you. We are simply clearing the ground so that when fear appears, and it will appear from time to time, you will know what it is, and more importantly, what it is not. And having seen that, we will be ready to take the next step. Understanding why fear feels so intensely personal, even though it never is. Now we come to a point where many earnest students stumble, not because they lack sincerity, but because appearances speak so convincingly to the senses. If fear is not personal, then why does it feel so intimate? Why does it seem to speak in my voice, disturb my sleep, touch my body, threaten my future? Surely, we say, if it feels this close, it must belong to me. And yet, that conclusion is precisely the final argument of the hypnotism itself. Fear feels personal because it presents itself through the individual, but it does not originate in the individual. Just as electricity flows through a wire without being created by the wire, so fear flows through human consciousness without being authored by it. The wire is not guilty of the current. It is simply the medium through which the current appears. And the moment the current is shut off, the wire remains unharmed, unchanged, innocent. So it is with fear. The human mind has been trained to identify experience with identity. If something happens to me, I assume it comes from me. If a thought arises in my mind, I assume it belongs to me. But this assumption has never been examined. It has simply been inherited. And unexamined assumptions are the very substance of universal belief. Scripture gives us a clue here, though it is often overlooked. Paul writes, "There hath no temptation taken you but such as is common to man." Common, not unique, not personal, not tailored to your character or your spiritual development. Common to man. The very universality of fear exposes its impersonal nature. Fear always speaks the same language. It warns of loss. It predicts disaster. It magnifies the future. It insists on urgency. It demands reaction. And it does this whether it appears as fear of disease, fear of lack, fear of loneliness, fear of failure, or fear of death. The costumes change, but the voice is always the same. If fear were personal, it would be original. It would express itself uniquely through each individual. But fear is never original. It is repetitive. It borrows its arguments from history, statistics, memories, and collective expectation. It is secondhand thought passed along, accepted, and reenacted. This is why Joel was so insistent that we stop asking, "Why am I afraid?" That question already assumes ownership. It assumes authorship. It assumes responsibility. And once we assume responsibility for fear, we place ourselves in the impossible position of having to overcome it by human effort. But Jesus never overcame fear by effort. He did not wrestle with it. He did not argue with it. He did not analyze its origin. When fear appeared, whether as a storm at sea or a mob with stones, he recognized something else present, and in that recognition, fear dissolved. When the disciples cried out in terror on the water, the Master did not say, "Why are you psychologically conditioned to fear storms?" He said, "It is I. Be not afraid." He did not correct their emotions. He revealed presence. And presence needs no defense. Now let us be very gentle here, because the human heart often carries a hidden burden. Many sincere people believe that their fear is evidence of spiritual failure. They believe that if they truly trusted God, fear would never arise. And so when fear does arise, they add guilt to fear, shame to anxiety, judgment to pain. This compounds the hypnotism. But fear is not sin. Fear is not unbelief. Fear is not proof that you are separate from God. Fear is simply a suggestion knocking at the door of consciousness. And a suggestion has no power unless it is entertained. The book of Job gives us a remarkable insight. Job says, "The thing which I greatly feared is come upon me." And this verse has often been used to suggest that fear causes events. But Job pointed out something far more important. Job was living in a consciousness permeated by the universal belief in reward and punishment. His fear did not create his suffering. His acceptance of a belief system made him susceptible to its claims. And the moment Job saw beyond that belief when he said, "I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee," the entire structure of suffering collapsed. Not because he fixed his thinking, but because he outgrew a belief. So when fear feels personal, do not take the bait. Do not say, "This is my weakness." Do not say, "This is my karma." Do not say, "This is my lesson." These interpretations only fasten the suggestion more tightly to identity. Instead, rest quietly in this recognition. This fear did not begin with me. This fear does not belong to me. This fear has no law to sustain it. These are not affirmations to be repeated. They are recognitions to be acknowledged and then released. And something very subtle will happen when this is truly seen. The struggle will stop. The inner argument will quiet. The urgency will begin to fade. Not because fear has been conquered, but because the illusion of ownership has been withdrawn. Jesus said, "Why take ye thought for tomorrow?" Not because tomorrow is unimportant, but because thought cannot secure it. Thought cannot protect life. Thought cannot govern being. Only God can do that. And God is not in the future. God is now. So let us take this into the silence again, not as a technique, not as an exercise, but as a resting place. Let us be willing, even for a moment, to stop identifying with the passing suggestions of the mind. Let us be willing to let fear pass through consciousness without signing our name to it. In that willingness, something begins to loosen. The grip of fear weakens, not through resistance, but through non-ownership. And this prepares us for the next and very necessary realization that the greatest mistake we can make is to fight hypnotism as though it were power. Now we come to what may be the most subtle and yet the most costly mistake made by sincere spiritual students. The attempt to overcome error as though error were a power. This mistake is understandable because the senses testify loudly. They insist that fear is real, that disease is active, that danger is present, and that something must be done at once. And so the human mind rushes forward to do battle. But the moment we fight fear, we have already lost the battle, not because fear is strong, but because we have granted it strength. The moment we resist error, we acknowledge it as presence. The moment we attempt to destroy fear, We confess that it exists as something that must be destroyed. Jesus never did this. He never resisted evil. He never fought disease. He never argued with sin. He simply recognized the presence of God, and in that recognition, the appearance of evil dissolved. Resist not evil, he said, not because evil should be tolerated, but because it is not a reality to resist. This is a point where many turn back because it seems impractical to the human mind. The human sense says, if I do not fight fear, it will overtake me. If I do not struggle against this condition, it will control me. And yet, has struggle ever brought peace? Has resistance ever produced freedom? Or has it only intensified the very thing it sought to destroy? The infinite way reveals something that runs directly counter to human reasoning. Error has no power to sustain itself. It is sustained only by belief, and belief feeds on attention. When fear is analyzed, feared, resisted, or treated as something to be overcome, it is being nourished, not intentionally, but inevitably. Joel often said that error is like a shadow. You cannot push a shadow away. You cannot wrestle it into submission. You cannot cut it off with a sword. The only way to remove a shadow is to turn toward the light. And the moment the light is recognized, the shadow is no longer there. Now, notice this carefully. Turning toward the light does not mean ignoring the shadow. It means refusing to give it reality. It means recognizing that what appears as fear is not an entity, not a force, not an intelligence, not a law. It is a suggestion, nothing more. When a hypnotist places a subject under suggestion, the subject may feel pain where there is none, see objects that are not there, or experience sensations that have no cause. But the moment the subject awakens, the experience vanishes, without treatment, without recovery time, without effort. Why? Because nothing ever happened. There was only belief. Universal hypnotism operates in exactly the same way. Humanity has been taught to believe in opposing powers, and the belief produces effects. But when consciousness awakens to the fact that there is only one power, one presence, one law, the effects disappear not because they were fixed, but because they were never real. This is why Joel warned practitioners never to take sides, even inwardly. The moment you say, I am on the side of health against disease, you have admitted disease as a power. The moment you say, I am on the side of peace against fear, you have admitted fear as a force. But there are not two sides. There is only God. Scripture affirms this again and again, though we have read it with dualistic eyes. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. This does not mean that God authors evil. It means that what appears as evil is a misinterpretation of God's activity through limited human perception. When perception is corrected, the appearance vanishes. So we are not here to improve fear. We are not here to reduce it, manage it, or coexist with it. We are here to see that fear has never been part of the divine order. And what is not ordained by God has no continuity, no law, no permanence. This requires a deep inner honesty. We must be willing to admit that much of what we have called spiritual practice has been nothing more than refined resistance. We have used truth as a weapon, prayer as a shield, affirmation as a defense. And while this may bring temporary relief, it does not bring liberation. Liberation comes only when we stop trying to save ourselves and allow God to reveal itself. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. That is not poetry, that is law. Holding your peace is not passivity, it is spiritual intelligence. It is the refusal to grant reality to anything unlike God. When fear appears, then the question is not, how do I get rid of this? The question is, what am I believing right now that gives this appearance a place? And the answer is never personal. It is always some version of the belief that God is not fully present here now as the only power. The moment that belief is seen, not condemned, not fought, just seen, it begins to dissolve. And in its place comes a quiet assurance that does not argue, does not insist, does not need to prove itself. It simply rests in the awareness of presence. And this brings us naturally, gently, into the next unfoldment of truth. The difference between treating a problem and recognizing reality. Now we approach a distinction that lies at the very heart of the infinite way. And unless this distinction is clearly seen, much spiritual work will remain laborious, uncertain, and exhausting. That distinction is the difference between treatment and recognition. And though the words may seem simple, the consciousness behind them is profound. Treatment assumes that something must be done. Recognition understands that something must be seen. Treatment begins with a problem and seeks a solution. Recognition begins with God and discovers that the problem never existed as reality. Treatment works from effect toward cause. Recognition rests in cause and allows the effect to conform. In the early stages of spiritual study, it is natural and even necessary for many to engage in mental treatment. One learns to deny error, to affirm truth, to replace negative thoughts with spiritual ideas. This may bring a measure of relief, and for that we can be grateful. But it is not the ultimate work, for even mental treatment assumes that error has presence and that truth must be applied to overcome it. Joel discovered, through years of healing practice, that the greatest healings did not occur when he worked hardest, spoke most clearly, or knew the most truth. They occurred when he stopped working altogether, when he ceased trying to use truth and allowed truth to use him, when he stopped treating the condition and simply recognized God. Recognition is not an activity of the mind. It is an awareness that dawns when the mind grows quiet. It is not something you do to a problem. It is something that happens to consciousness when belief yields to presence. In thy light shall we see light, not in our effort, not in our understanding. In thy light. This is why Jesus never treated disease as something to be corrected. He did not say, let me work on this blindness. He said, I must work the works of him that sent me. And the work of God is not treatment, it is revelation. When the blind man saw, it was not because blindness had been destroyed, but because sight was recognized as the natural state of being. Now, the human mind objects to this. It says, but I still feel fear. I still see the condition. I still experience the problem. And that is true so long as we are looking from the standpoint of the senses. But recognition does not argue with the senses. It simply refuses to grant them final authority. The flesh profiteth nothing. The infinite way does not ask you to deny your experience. It asks you to reinterpret it. What appears as fear is not a thing to be fixed. It is a signal that consciousness is being asked to lift itself above belief. It is an invitation, not a threat. And when that invitation is accepted, not intellectually, but spiritually, the appearance loses its meaning. This is why Joel said that truth is not a power. Truth does not act. Truth does not do anything to error. Truth reveals reality, and reality displaces illusion without effort. If truth were a power, it would have to struggle against opposing powers. But there are no opposing powers. There is only God. So when we speak of recognition, we are speaking of a shift in standpoint. We are no longer looking at life from the outside in, trying to fix effects. We are resting in the inside out, from the awareness of God as the only cause, the only law, the only presence. And from that standpoint, appearances rearrange themselves naturally, effortlessly, without personal intervention. This is what the psalmist meant when he said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He did not say, "The Lord will become my shepherd if I pray correctly." He did not say, "The Lord will shepherd me after I improve my thinking." He stated a present fact, and that fact carries its own fulfillment. Recognition is the acknowledgement of what already is. It is the quiet acceptance of the truth that God is governing his universe perfectly, even when the senses deny it. It is the refusal to take responsibility for outcomes that belong to divine law. And in that refusal, a great burden is lifted. Now, let us be very clear. Recognition is not indifference. It is not passivity. It is not ignoring human needs. It is the highest form of attention, the attention that sees God where the senses see only appearance. And that seeing is creative. It does not fix things. It reveals their true nature. When recognition takes place, fear does not gradually diminish. It stops mattering. It loses its voice. It becomes irrelevant, not because you have mastered it, but because you are no longer listening to it. You have tuned consciousness to a different frequency, the frequency of divine being. This is why Joel could say that many healings occur the moment the practitioner realizes this has nothing to do with the patient. The moment the personal element is removed, the condition collapses, because the personal element was the only place the belief could attach itself. So we are not here to become better at treatment. We are here to grow into recognition. And recognition cannot be forced. It comes as consciousness ripens. It comes as we are willing to let go of the need to do something and allow ourselves to be still enough for God to reveal himself. And this naturally leads us to the next unfoldment. How this recognition functions in the moment. Fear actually appears when it knocks at the door of daily life and demands attention. Now we come to the place where this teaching touches daily living, for it is one thing to understand these principles in the quiet of meditation, and quite another to remember them when fear suddenly appears in the midst of ordinary experience. And yet it is precisely here that recognition proves its value not as a theory, but as a living awareness. When fear appears, it rarely announces itself politely. It comes as a sudden tightening in the body, a rush of thought, a sense of urgency, a picture of danger or lack projected into the future. The human impulse is immediate: to analyze, to defend, to correct, to pray at the problem. And if we follow that impulse, we are already participating in the hypnotism. Joel taught that the first and most important thing to do in such a moment is to do nothing. Not nothing in the sense of neglect, but nothing in the sense of non-reaction. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Notice again that the instruction is not to fix, but to see. This pause is not a technique. It is a withdrawal of consent. It is the moment when we refuse to agree that what is appearing has authority over consciousness. We are not denying that fear is felt. We are denying that fear is law. There is a vast difference. In that pause, we gently turn away from the appearance, not physically, but inwardly. We stop looking at the fear. We stop listening to the fear. We stop asking it questions. We do not ask, why am I afraid? Or what does this mean? Those questions only deepen involvement. Instead, we allow attention to rest in the awareness of presence. This may feel, at first, like doing nothing while something dangerous is happening, but that feeling is itself part of the suggestion. Fear always claims urgency. Fear always says, act now or else. But God does not speak in urgency. God does not rush. God does not panic. He that believeth shall not make haste. So we rest, if only for a few seconds, in this inner acknowledgement. God is here, not as an idea, not as a comforting thought, but as the only presence. And because God is here, something else cannot be. Two presences cannot occupy the same consciousness. Now, you may find that the mind tries to intrude with spiritual words, affirmations, or remembered truths. Let them pass. Do not fight them. Do not cling to them. They may have served their purpose in bringing you to this point, but now they must step aside. Recognition is not verbal. It is silent. Joel often said that the most powerful recognition is wordless. It is the inner realization that says, without language, this is not power. And the moment that realization dawns, even faintly, the intensity of fear begins to lessen, not because fear is being worked on, but because belief is loosening. It is important to understand that this does not always result in an immediate emotional calm. Sometimes the body continues to react for a while. Sometimes the mind continues to chatter. Do not be discouraged by this. The work is not being undone. The body and mind are slower to respond than consciousness. First the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn in the ear. The essential thing is that you do not return to reaction. Do not go back to arguing with the appearance. Do not check to see if the fear is gone. That, too, is a form of involvement. Instead, gently return again and again to the recognition of presence, without strain, without effort, without expectation. This is what it means to live by grace and not by works. Grace is not something God gives us when we behave correctly. Grace is the activity of God itself operating when we cease interfering. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Weakness here does not mean moral failure. It means the abandonment of personal effort. In practical terms, this may mean that you go on with your day while fear whispers in the background. You do not stop your life to fix it. You do not put everything on hold until you feel better. You live as though God governs, because God does. And in living that way, fear gradually finds no place to attach itself. Over time, something remarkable happens. Fear still appears, but it does not register in the same way. It no longer feels like a command. It feels like static noise without meaning. And eventually, even that fades. This is not because you have become spiritually strong. It is because you have stopped believing that strength was required. You have learned through experience that recognition is enough, that God's presence does the work that human effort never could. And now, having seen how recognition functions in the moment fear appears, we are ready to enter more deeply into the silence itself, the place where hypnotism cannot operate at all. Now we come to the inner sanctuary of this work, the place where all appearances lose their voice, and where fear, disease, lack, and discord have no language with which to speak. This place is the silence, not the silence of absence, but the silence of fullness, not emptiness, but completion. Most people misunderstand silence. They believe silence means the absence of thought, or a state of mental stillness that must be achieved through discipline. That is not the silence of which we speak. The silence is not something you create. It is something you enter when you stop trying to manage consciousness. Joel taught that hypnotism cannot operate in silence, not because silence is powerful, but because hypnotism requires mental activity. Hypnotism feeds on reaction, interpretation, resistance, and hope. Where these cease, hypnotism collapses of its own weight. Be still and know that I am God. Notice again the order. Stillness comes first. Knowing follows. And the knowing is not intellectual. It is a felt certainty, an inner assurance that does not argue and does not explain. When you sit in meditation, or when you pause inwardly during the day, you are not attempting to contact God. God is not absent. You are not calling God into the room. You are withdrawing attention from the false activity that has obscured your awareness of God's presence. The human mind always wants to do something, repeat a word, affirm a truth, visualize an outcome, and for a season, these things may be helpful, but eventually they must be relinquished. They are scaffolding, not the structure. They are fingers pointing to the moon, not the moon itself. True silence begins when you stop trying to reach God and allow yourself to rest in the fact that God is already present. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? There is no place you must go. There is only something you must stop doing. In this silence, you may notice that thoughts continue to pass. Do not attempt to stop them. Do not label them as distractions. They are like clouds moving across the sky. You are not the clouds. You are the sky. And the sky does not struggle with weather. The moment you stop identifying with thought, thought loses authority. And without authority, it cannot hypnotize. It can speak, but it cannot command. It can suggest, but it cannot convince. Joel often described this silence as a listening attitude, not listening for words, not waiting for messages, but a listening that is really a yielding of personal will, a yielding of personal concern, a yielding of personal responsibility for outcomes. Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, for your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of all these things. To take no thought does not mean to neglect living. It means to stop assuming that thought is the source of life's order. In the silence, there is no attempt to solve problems. Problems dissolve because they are never brought into the sanctuary. The silence is not a courtroom. It is not a workshop. It is a holy ground where shoes, human concepts, fears, plans are removed. And sometimes, in this silence, nothing seems to happen. There is no feeling, no light, no reassurance. This is not failure. This is often the deepest work. The soul is being instructed while the mind remains uninvolved. The wind bloweth where it listeth. Thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh, and whither it goeth. At other times there may come a gentle assurance, a sudden release, or an inner click, a sense that something has shifted. Do not cling to these experiences. They are signs along the way, not the destination. The destination is a life lived from this inner stillness. As this silence becomes familiar, you will notice that you no longer need to withdraw from activity to enter it. It begins to accompany you in conversation, in decision-making, in moments of challenge. You find yourself inwardly quiet even while outwardly engaged. This is what Joel meant by living in the consciousness of Christ, not thinking about Christ, not imitating Christ, but allowing the Christ awareness to be the atmosphere of your being. I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And in this consciousness, hypnotism has no foothold. Fear may appear, but it cannot penetrate. Discord may present itself, but it cannot convince. The world continues to speak, but you are no longer compelled to answer. Now, having entered the silence where hypnotism cannot operate, we are ready to see how this inner stillness transforms daily life, not by withdrawal from the world, but by living in it without being governed by it. Now we come to the natural fruitage of this work, because spiritual realization is never meant to remove us from life, but to restore us to life as it truly is. The goal is not escape from the world, but freedom within it. Not withdrawal, but dominion. Not dominion by force, but by understanding. Jesus said plainly, "My kingdom is not of this world." He did not say that the world does not exist, nor did he say that we must leave it. He said that the governing power of his life did not arise from the visible realm. And that same truth must become practical in us. To live in the world without being governed by appearances means that we no longer accept what we see, hear, or feel as final authority. We may acknowledge appearances, we are not naive, but we do not react to them as though they were power. Reaction is agreement. Recognition is freedom. Appearances are always changing. Today they say one thing, tomorrow another. Health changes, finances change, relationships change, opinions change. If your peace depends on appearances, your peace will never be stable. But when your peace rests in the recognition of God as the only presence, the fluctuations of the world lose their ability to disturb. This does not mean that challenges vanish overnight. It means that challenges no longer define consciousness. They become passing phenomena, not governing realities. These things are come to pass that ye might believe. Believe in what? Not in appearances, but in the unseen order behind them. Joel often reminded students that the infinite way is not a system for fixing human problems. It is a way of awakening out of the belief that problems have power. And as that awakening deepens, problems resolve themselves, not always in the way the human mind expects, but always in harmony with divine law. Living this way requires humility. The ego wants to take credit. It wants to say, I handled that spiritually. But the moment we claim authorship, we step back into personal sense. True spiritual living is anonymous. It leaves no footprint. It knows quietly, not my will, but thine be done. You will find that decisions arise more naturally. You do not agonize over choices. You listen inwardly. And when the movement is clear, you act. When it is not clear, you wait. Waiting is not passivity. Waiting is trust. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. As this way of life unfolds, something else becomes evident. Compassion replaces judgment. When you no longer see appearances as power, you no longer condemn those who seem caught in them. You understand that fear, disease, and sin are not personal failures, but collective beliefs claiming expression. This understanding does not make you indifferent. It makes you gentle. It removes the sharp edges of criticism. You no longer try to correct people. You behold them. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is spiritual recognition. And now we come to a point that is often misunderstood. This way of living does not make life smaller, it makes it larger. You do not become withdrawn or dull. You become more alive, more responsive, more present. The senses no longer dominate, but they are no longer enemies. They take their proper place as instruments, not masters. You enjoy beauty without clinging. You experience activity without strain. You engage with others without absorption. There is a quiet center that remains untouched. This is the Sabbath consciousness, not a day, but a state of rest in God. And from this rest, all right action flows. Now, we must understand something very important. Fear does not disappear all at once, nor does personal will dissolve in a single illumination. These are deep-rooted habits of consciousness, built over generations. Grace works gently, but relentlessly. Fear weakens as its foundation erodes. Personal will softens as trust increases. There is no violence in this process. God does not tear anything away. What falls away does so because it is no longer needed. At first, you may notice fear returning after moments of peace. Do not be discouraged. This does not mean that realization has failed. It means that layers are being uncovered. Each return of fear is an invitation not to fight, but to recognize again. Joel taught that every recurrence of fear is an opportunity to deepen recognition. The mistake is to treat fear as an enemy. Fear is not an enemy. It is a signal. It tells you where belief still claims authority. So when fear arises, do not say, "Why is this happening again?" Say inwardly, "Here is another place where I may yield." Yielding is the great secret. Yielding is the surrender of false responsibility. Personal will, likewise, loosens its grip slowly. At first, we still want God's will, as long as it aligns with our own. Then comes the deeper prayer, "Show me thy will." And finally, there comes the prayer, without words, without desire, without agenda, a simple availability, "Here am I, send me." Not to do something specific, but to be used. As fear and personal will dissolve, something extraordinary takes place. Gratitude becomes constant. Not gratitude for things, but gratitude for being. You are grateful without knowing why. Life feels sufficient. The hunger to become something else fades. This is not resignation. It is fulfillment. Now we arrive at the place where seeking ends not because everything has been attained, but because seeking itself is seen as unnecessary. You no longer seek God because you no longer believe God is absent. Seeking always assumes distance. Recognition reveals immediacy. The kingdom of God is within you, not will be, not can be, is. At this stage, spiritual practice becomes very simple. You meditate not to gain something, but because silence is home. You read scripture not to learn something, but to listen for resonance. You pray not to ask, but to commune. Life itself becomes the practice. You will still encounter challenges, but they no longer raise the question, why is this happening? That question belongs to personal sense. Instead, there is a quiet knowing, this too is within God. And that knowing is enough. There is nothing dramatic about this stage. It is almost disappointingly ordinary, and yet it is the pearl of great price. Peace without conditions, joy without cause, confidence without assertion. Joel once said that the ultimate attainment is invisibility, not physical invisibility, but the disappearance of the personal self as a center of concern. Life flows, God acts, you watch, and so we come full circle back to where we began, non-reaction. Not as discipline, not as restraint, but as the natural outcome of knowing that there is only one presence, one power, one life. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, stayed not strained, stayed not forced. This is the infinite way, not a path you walk, a recognition you rest in,